SQL Server Integration Services, more ETL. In the last nugget, I showed you a really simple example of using ETL. We just grabbed information from a flat text file and dumped it into a database table. Well, in this nugget, we're going to take it a step further. We're going to provide some looping so you're not just dealing with one text file, you can deal with multiple files that are sitting in the same directory. Okay, so this is where we introduce user variables, where you can store things such as the file name, or you can store things such as the directory name. Then we'll take a look at package configurations. So with the package configuration, you can actually store the value of a variable in a file such as an XML file or even in a database table, so you don't have to make modifications continually for the package. And the reason why we do that is you might be in a development environment here, and then tomorrow you might be in a production environment. Well, the directory names are probably going to be different. Then we're also going to take a look at writing to a flat file, so we're going the opposite direction now. Now we're reading information from a database table and dumping it to a flat file. And we can do things such as convert things to uppercase, and we're also going to implement sorting in this nugget. Let's get started with looping. In our previous nugget, we did a simple ETL operation by which we extracted information from our contacts file, then we performed a postal code lookup from one of our tables, and then took that information and put it into a database table. All that's fine, but in the real world there will be times when the source file is actually going to be multiple files. For example, you might have a directory and you might have several files inside of that directory, and maybe you want to loop through each and every one of those files and pull information from that. So that's what I'm going to show you right now. I'm going to show you how to do a for each loop. Now notice that right now I'm in my data flow. I want to click on control flow, and here we have only one item in here, which is extract from flat file. What we want to do is click on our toolbox, and you'll see that we have a for each loop container. So we're going to just take that and drag it onto here. And the next thing you want to do is take this existing item right there and put it inside of there. So this for each loop is going to loop through several files. There might just be one file, or they can be maybe 20 or 30 files. So once you have this structure there, I want you to double click on your for each loop container, and you'll see here that we can rename this. I'm going to call this for each file loop, and I'll just call this for each file loop as well. And then we can look at our collection right here. We've got this enumerator that's going to be looping through each and every item. Okay, so we are going to have a variable, and that's what this variable mapping is all about. So I can create a new variable, and that's going to store the name of the file each time we loop through it. So I'm just going to say new variable, make sure that the container is package scope. That just means that the lifetime of the variable is for the whole package. And then we can also give this a meaningful name. So here I'll call this file name. And a namespace is just a way to organize your different names. I'm just going to stick with the default of user. In other words, if you have two variables called X, if they're in different namespaces, then they don't collide with each other. Okay, so the value type will be a string, and we can also provide a default value if we want to. I'm going to leave that blank for right now. So we just hit OK, and we'll go ahead and hit OK right here. Now remember, when we declared our flat file connection, we actually hard-coded in the name of the file. Let's double click on this and let's change it up a bit. Okay, so when we double click on this, it says that it is c:\contacts.txt. We don't want that anymore. Okay, so what we can do is just hit cancel on there, make sure that this connection is highlighted right here. We'll go to View and look at our Properties window. We'll move this over a little bit. You'll see under Expressions there's this ellipsis right here. Go ahead and click on it. Under Property, we're going to find our connection string. And for the expression, we'll hit that ellipsis, pull this down here, and here we'll find the variable that we just created. User file name. So I'm just going to drag this down here, and you'll see that it automatically puts an @ sign in front of it, and it's just fully qualifying this variable name. Okay, so now that we've got that, we can hit OK. And then we'll hit OK right there. Now, if you want to test this, make sure that your contacts table is already empty because we've got that primary key. You don't want to violate the primary key that you've got. Okay, let's just do a little bit of double check here on our work. I'm going to double click on the for each file loop here. And under collection, we need to make sure that this drop down here actually says for each file enumerator. Okay, so here it is. And so the folder that it's going to be looking at is going to be under C:\\, and the files that it's looking for is contact star.txt. Make sure that this says fully qualified, and you can also say traverse subfolders or leave it unchecked. It's up to you. And then we'll hit OK. At this point, we can debug it. So I'll just say start debugging. And so far, it looks great. Okay, so we can double check our work by simply going to our SQL Server Management Studio, and we can do a select star from contacts, and there's our information. So you'll see here that we've got about 8 different records here. And if I pull open my text editor and look at my source files, here we have contacts.txt, and we also have contacts2.txt. So there's our data. So pretty straightforward. So just to wrap up in a nutshell, what we did here is we created a variable that had package scope. Call it anything you want to. In our case, if you want to look at any of your variable names, you can always just right-click on this screen right here, click on variables, and you can see it right there in the scope. So we created that, and in our for each file loop, we specified that we had a for each file enumerator, and we specified the folder. I'll show you a little bit later how to make this folder location be dynamic. In other words, you can create a variable to store that so you don't have to hard code that folder location. And then the other thing that we did was we looked at our flat file connection, and we went to our expressions right here, made sure our connection string was referencing that variable. Let's take this a step further. So right now, the directory name is hard-coded. In other words, if I double-click on this for each file loop, and I look at my collection right here, C:\/ is hard-coded in there. Okay, so what we can do is create a variable that holds the directory name, and then we can set that variable. The next thing we can do after that, we can take it a step further and create what we call a package configuration, where you're actually setting that variable outside of the package. So let's get started on this. I'm going to hit cancel. I'm going to create another variable called dir_name. Okay, so just right click on there, go to variables, and you know what, if we can just stop debugging right here, then we can right click on here. We can just hit this icon, add variable, and here we'll say dir_name. Make sure that it has package scope. So when I click on dir_name right here, I want to look at the value type here. By default, it says it's int32. Let's change that to be a string. Okay, and now we're going to go to our for each file loop. So we'll just double click on here, and under the collection, under expressions, here we can find the directory property, and we're going to set that to our variable that we just created. So just take this user dir_name and drag it right over there. And then we hit OK again. We no longer need this hard-coded C:\\. Okay, so I'm going to hit OK on here. I'm going to go once again to my directory name, and you'll see here that for the value it's blank. It does not have a default value right now. So we have been using C:\/ as our directory. Just to show you that this is actually working, I'm going to set this to C:\temp. And I do have 2 flat files that I placed in my temp directory, just so we can test this. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and save this here. And we can go ahead and run this as well. So let's just choose debug and start debugging, and this should be just fine. Now to test this, I can just go to my SQL Server Management Studio, pull this over here, and I'll just say select star from contacts. And once again, you see that I have all this data in here. Let's take this a step further. So we hard-coded the C:temp in here. That is the default value. Let's just go ahead and get rid of that. Instead of saving that value within our package, we're going to save it in a package configuration file that's outside of the package. So to create a package configuration file, make sure you get out of your debug mode, and then just right-click on here and say Package Configurations. Now, if there's something already in there, you can go ahead and remove it. Make sure that Enable Package Configurations is selected, and then we'll say Add. Now, there's several different types of configurations. The most popular is the XML configuration file. So other options here are you can set an environment variable, you can set a Windows registry entry, a parent package variable, or even store this information inside of a SQL Server database itself. As I mentioned, XML is by far the most popular. Okay, so you're going to have to remember where you're saving your XML configuration file. Okay, so let's just browse on here, and we'll go to our C drive. It really doesn't matter where you place it. I'm going to call this file myconfig, and it's automatically going to add this little extension here, and we'll hit save. Okay, so in a minute we'll be able to open that up with the text editor and make a small modification in there. Okay, so now we'll hit next. All you need to do down here is scroll down until you see your for each file loop, and then under there you see variables. Under there is our directory name. Under there is properties, and then you have all this stuff, all these properties regarding your directory name. So we don't want to make this too complex. Let's just select the name and the value and then hit next. So there will be some skeleton code, and you're going to have to then actually hard code in the directory name once we open this. You'll see it in a minute. We hit next and then finish and then close. Okay, so at this point I can just open up a simple text editor. I'll just pull this over here, and we'll just do File Open, and let's look directly under our C drive, and here is my config file. Okay, so I'm going to do a little word wrapping here. It's a little bit hard to read in a text editor, but if you open this up in Internet Explorer, some kind of web browser, it'll look a lot nicer. In fact, I'm going to do that for you right now. I have opened this up in Firefox, and this is my information. So you'll see here that there's just some header information, and here it specifies the property. So here's the name, which is dir name, and then the actual value, the configured value, is empty right now, and we want to put something in there. Okay, so let's take that out of the way, go back here. Here is the placeholder for our configured value. So right in between there is where we want to say C:\temp. So you see, the purpose of this is if somebody has already created the package and they don't want anybody to manipulate it anymore, what they can do is say, hey, you know what, you can set all of your variables inside of these package configurations. So I'm just going to save that, and then we'll move this out of the way. How do we actually execute our package? Well, you can go to your directory where your package is stored. So here I'm under Documents and Settings, Administrator, My Documents, and so on. Here's my project right here, and here is my package.dtsx. If you double click on that, it says Execute Package Utility, and under Configurations, this is where you can say, hey, you know what, I'm going to use that configuration file that I just created. So choose that, say Open, and now we can execute it. All you need to do is hit this Execute button, and it will tell you how things are going. So we'll just scroll down here a little bit. If you get an error, it looks like we had a violation of primary key constraint. That's an easy fix. It just looks like we forgot to delete the data in the table. So we'll go ahead and close that. I'm going to go to my SQL Server Management Studio. We'll make sure we delete that data, and then we can execute this one more time. Okay, so this should look a lot better. Scrolling down, everything looks just fine. A few warnings here and there, but no big deal. So we hit close. If you want to double check the work, you can always do select star from contacts, and there's our data. Now, up until this point, we've been taking data from a flat file and doing something with it and then putting it into a database table. How about going the other way around? What if we want to take our data in this table right here and then spill it into a flat file? Well, let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to move this out of the way. We'll make sure that this is actually populated with data first of all. And let's just go ahead and close this project. And we'll create a new one. This will be an integration services project, and we'll call this ETL from table. Now we want to make sure that we're in this section right here, and we can go ahead and go to our toolbox, and you'll see once again we've got data flow task. Let's drag that on there. You can rename this to something else, such as extract from contacts table. Once you've got that, you can either double click on it or go to this right here. It doesn't matter. And you're going to then drag and drop a source. So our data flow source here, instead of being flat file, it's now going to be an OLE DB source. Let's drag that on there. We can then call this contacts table. If you double click on this, it's going to ask you about the connection. Well, look at this. We don't have any kind of connection in here. So we'll hit cancel. And we do need to create a connection. So we'll just right click under connection managers and we'll say new OLE DB connection. And this is the data connection. We'll hit OK. And now when we double click on this, it will ask us for table or view. We pull this right here, and here is our contacts table. We can even do a preview if we want to. If we look at our columns, these are the available columns. If we're only interested in certain columns, we can, pick and choose. We can also specify what the output column is going to be called. So in our table, there's a column called last and another column called first. And our output, we might want to call this like last name and first name just to be a little bit more descriptive. And then we can hit OK. Once again, we're not going to worry about error output. That's going to be in our next nugget. Next, we can go into our toolbox right here. We can look at our data flow destinations. And here we can say flat file destination. Just drag this over here. We can then click on that, take this green arrow, drag it over to our flat file destination. And now see this little X here, that means we need to double click on it and make some modifications. The flat file destination has to be associated with a flat file connection manager, and so we need to create one of those. So for our connection manager, we're going to make this delimited, so the columns are going to be delimited when it's printed out. And we'll just stick with the default name for this. We do need to provide a file name of where this is going to get dumped to. So I'm just going to call this contacts3.txt. And here's the header row delimiter. Header rows to skip. By default, it is set to 0. You can check this column names in the first data row. So what that's going to do is in the first row of the dump file, it's going to put the names of the columns there. Next, click on columns. Now under my preview right here, everything is showing up as blank because I don't have anything in my underlying tables, so don't worry about that. Under advanced, you can override any of the column delimiters or data types. So it looks like we're good to go here. I now want to go to mappings, make sure that everything is mapped fine. That looks great, and we'll just hit OK, and the X is no longer there. Let's do some testing. First of all, I want to make sure that the original data in our table is there. So I'm going to open up my SQL Server Management Studio, and I'll just do a select star from contacts. And yes, we do have 8 records in there. So minimize this. And now we can go ahead and debug this guy. Okay, we have green across the board. That's a good sign. Now the way to double check this is to simply open up a text editor. And I'm going to open up my C:\\\. contacts3.txt, and there is my dump. So notice on the first line here, we have the column names just like we did because we checked that box. So you now know how to get information from a flat file, dump it into a table, and vice versa. How about some other interesting things? For example, before we dump it to the file, how about we perform some kind of sorting? Well, let's get out of our debug mode right now. And let's take a closer look at this tabbed area right here. I'm just going to get rid of that window so we have more space to work with. So we have our OLDB source that goes to our flat file destination. We actually want something in between, which is the sorting. So let's actually get rid of this arrow. Delete that right there. And we go to our toolbox. Under your toolbox, notice that we have a sort task. So we're going to drag that onto here real quickly. And then we're going to go from our contacts table to our sort. We can double click on our sort. Notice that we have that red X, which means we need to do some kind of configuration. And it just asks us, how are we going to perform the sorting? Pass through simply means we're going to pass that information on to the next task. If we uncheck one of these, then that column will not be available in the next task. So let's perform a pass through on all of these. And let's specify that we're going to sort first of all by last name. So the output alias, let's just stick with the default of last name. It will be a primary sort, and then we can do a sort on first name. Both of these are in ascending order, so let's say we have multiple Johnsons, it will then do a sorting by first name. Now that that looks good, let's go ahead and take this green arrow, make sure it's pointing to the destination there, double click on your flat file destination, and you'll see that we've got some errors here. It's saying invalid column references and so on. Don't worry about that. I just want you to say select all, and then just say delete invalid column reference. And now when we double click on this, here we have the different mappings. And this is coming from the sorting. This is going to the output. Okay, so now we can hit OK. And let's test this. So we're going to debug it. And then we're going to look at our flat file to see if it really did write to it properly. I'm going to pull over my contacts3.txt and check this out. These are no longer in numeric order. They're now by the last name and then the first name. See how we have our Johnsons here? Julie comes before Sean. So we got our sorting to work. Let's go ahead and get out of debug mode. Okay, so let's review what we learned in this nugget. We first of all performed some looping. We had a for each loop container that we put our task into. In our example, we were looping through different files, and so our data source was multiple flat files. Make sure when you're doing that you create a user variable to store the file name. It's important that you understand the scope. The scope is the lifetime of that variable. So we were safe with using package scope. Once we created a variable for the file name, we could also create a variable for the directory name, so we didn't have to hardcode that as well. We took this one step further and we created an XML-based package configuration. Going through that wizard, it creates the skeleton XML. Then we went into our text editor and modified our XML, adding in the static information. The whole purpose of our package configuration is that you don't have to hardcode stuff into your actual tasks. Then to execute this, just go to Windows Explorer, navigate to where your actual package is, right-click on it, and specify your package configuration location right there, and then just execute it. We also performed writing to a flat file. When you're writing to a flat file, you can specify the column and row delimiters, and you can also tell it whether you want it to print out the column headings or not. And then in our last task, we inserted a sorting task to sort the information before it went to the flat file. You can sort on as many columns as you want. You're going to have a primary sort column and perhaps a secondary or even, a third or fourth sorting column. Well, I hope this has been informative, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.